All right, welcome to the WordPress New York City meetup. Okay, so tonight what we're going to do, we're going to have Sveta present about accessibility with websites. Sveta, come on up.
Hi everyone, my name is Sveta. Actually, it's short for a longer version of my name here. And I'm originally from Russia, that's why I have such a long name. And I'm presenting about web accessibility, something I'm very interested in as a deaf person. So as someone who's disabled, naturally I've become very interested in web accessibility. And these are some examples of logos that represent accessibility, because not everyone uses a wheelchair. There are people who are blind or deaf who have cognitive disabilities as well, who aren't as necessarily represented by the wheelchair logo that's usually used for accessibility. So you have the eye, the hand, the ear, and a brain to represent cognitive abilities as well. So I'm sure all of you know who Tim Berners-Lee is. If anyone who doesn't know, or who knows who he is, who knows who Tim Berners-Lee is? Okay, many of you know who he is, and this is a quote from him. "The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect." In the early days of the web, we're actually more accessible than now, because most of the websites were text and links and not very many images or videos, so there wasn't a lot of audio. But today, 97% of websites are not accessible. Many people who are blind, they think, oh, they'll just use screen readers, that's good enough for them. But actually the sites must be coded in order to be compatible with screen readers, or people who can't use a mouse or who can't use a keyboard need other devices. And also automatic captions are not very accessible for deaf people. So 97% of websites as a result are not accessible. And maybe people think that people with disabilities are a small group of people, but actually disabled people can constitute the largest minority group, more than foreigners. And the market here for people in the United States is $1 trillion. That's double the spending power than teenagers. And then worldwide, people with disabilities can constitute a $4 trillion marketplace. And that's almost the size of China. So it's a really important group of people that should not be ignored. And it's not just people with disabilities who benefit from web accessibility, as you see from these pictures. You have a mother with a stroller and also a business person carrying a roller suitcase. And so ramps are actually very helpful for people in all these situations. So it also benefits people who use carts or any sort of wheeled devices. Ramps help, and elevators help these people as well. So it's not just for people who are using wheelchairs. Also, captions not only benefit people who are deaf, but for speakers of foreign languages also benefit from captions. People who are developing their literacy skills, or maybe if someone's in a noisy environment and want to watch something quietly on the web, that's another reason why captions for videos are so important. So in talking about the spending power of people who have disabilities, doesn't only affect people with disabilities, but their friends and family members as well. If products and services are not accessible, then you lose those extra clientele as well, because you have 2 billion people worldwide who are connected to people with disabilities. And that constitutes a disposable income of $8 trillion. So it's another benefit. The devices that can help people with independence in terms of computers or mobile phones. You have a large audience participation. There's increased market opportunity. Also, having a positive image. You're not just waiting for someone to sue you because your website isn't accessible. If you show that you're making that investment for accessibility, It's much a better investment than spending money on a lawsuit later. Improved usability is another benefit, and also higher search engine results. And speaking of search engines, this is the largest accessibility needs user on the internet, because Google, Yahoo, and Bing, those sites can't seed images, and they really rely on captioning for the images. If a video doesn't have captions, it also does not appear in search results, because Google can't hear a video. So the captioning and the tags are very important for search engines. And also and with JavaScript, sometimes the code in JavaScript is not compatible with some keyboards as well. How many of you are familiar with web accessibility guidelines? So it seems a fair number of you. And perhaps it might be very overwhelming because the list of guidelines are quite long, and even for myself, I can be quite overwhelmed with that. So people tend to make these categorizations and create basic guidelines, which are described by this acronym POUR. Perceivable, meaning blind people who can't perceive the image, they might need an audio to supplement. Or for people who can't hear, they rely on captions. Operable means people who use a keyboard to make sure that all the functions can be used by a keyboard, not just by a mouse. You don't have to hover over something to be able to see the option. People who can't rely on a mouse would then not be able to use that function. Understandable means if the text is there, to make sure the text is easily understood by any user, even though maybe you might think, well, there's a YouTube video that YouTube has automatic captions, that might be good enough, but automatic captions are usually unintelligible. They really do need to be cleaned up. Otherwise, most deaf people will not be able to understand them. And robust means something that's compatible with current and possibly future technologies. So now talking a little bit about how to make a website accessible in terms of the technical aspects. The semantic web, in terms of the semantic web, content is king. So perhaps someone has a fabulously beautiful looking website, but the functionality and the content is weak. So we have these three elements, HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript. The HTML provides a really strong foundation first, and then you can use style sheets with CSS, and then JavaScript is probably it's best to use JavaScript only when necessary. I know it might seem fun to add some more fun functions, but the less JavaScript, the more accessible a website could be. How many of you are familiar with, that WordPress has this word role, R-O-L-E? How many of you noticed that in WordPress? A few of you? I've noticed that role equals main, role, banner, and I thought perhaps some people think you can just delete that, but that's a very important part of the web accessibility. And here are some examples of role, like body, the role document, header has a role banner, and if main will have a role main. Footer has this content info. So on the WordPress template, keep the role, don't get rid of that. And there are more examples of this role as well. In terms of the HTML structure, it's important to have a good structure to the website. Many of you might skip links, but it's important that it's in the top of the HTML page, because many people who use screen readers don't want to hear a link over and over again for every page. So they prefer to have the option of skip link to the main content or other parts of the web page. You can also hide that with the CSS style sheets, but don't use display none or visible none, because that will cause the screen reader not to show the content. If you indent over position, then you can hide those commands that only the screen reader will be able to distinguish. And talking about images, navigation, all the navigation buttons must have bullets. UL and I for the screen reader. And you can style with CSS, but it's important to have those bullet points. And drop-down menus is best if you use HTML and CSS, not JavaScript for those. And then you can have the drop-downs in CSS. And it's also important to keep the drop-downs limited to maybe 2 levels, because the screen reader is going to repeat that over and over again. And also header H1, H2, H3, it's best to use that for the content organization, not for decoration. So the H1, keep that just for the page title, and H2 for subcategories, not using that for the menu or anything other than just the content. And it's really annoying to see click here to download. You don't need that. Just click here to download is very annoying, or click here to download the checklist. You can just have download checklist and the kind of file that it is, because the screen reader hears click here, and the screen reader isn't sure what you're clicking for. So the message, if it's just very clear, download to a PDF, then the person who is using the website will know to expect a certain kind of document. For the content text, make sure that it can be resized in terms of a percentage or in the terms of EM. This way people who have low vision, who have some vision but can't see very well, can resize the text. And similarly on mobile devices. Don't have frames, image map, or layout tables. Those are very hard for screen readers to be able to detect. Make sure that all functions can be accessible via the keyboard, and that JavaScript, if you have to use it, it's better if it's downgradable, because then if there's a problem with JavaScript, the website's still functionable. And write in simple language using bullet points. Most people, anyone can have a disability, or anyone doesn't, or with the general public doesn't necessarily have as much time to spend reading a lot of text on a web page. You also want to have the web layout consistent for each page. If you need to, it's best to use HTML5 Canvas instead of Flash. You can make Flash accessible, but HTML5 is a better way to go, because Flash is also not accessible to users of iPads and iPhones anyway. I'm talking about the images and logos. So there's a lot of confusion in terms of alt and titles. Alt means what you can't see. The title is just an optional thing. You don't need to have that. If it's an image that links to another page, like logo on the top left of the navigation, you could have a description of what the image is. Accessibility logo, for example, alt. And then the title will say go to home page or going to a different website. If the image is just decorative, then you can keep the alt empty, but don't remove it. Just have it there, but it doesn't need to have anything in there. And also no text in the graphics. It's best to use HTML for the text in graphics, because blind people won't be able to read the text inside of an image. You can avoid image maps if possible. That would be the best. Providing text or shapes for a color button, and I'll talk about color in a moment, And don't use strobing, flickering, or any sort of optical illusion, because people who have seizures will be sensitive to that, and they might not even be able to see that or detect that. If it's something that's a slow or pulsating type of image, that could be okay. But something that's an optical illusion, I mean, I know maybe it's okay it's apropos for some websites, but it's usually not very accessible. In talking about color, 1 in 10 men are colorblind. And I know I've met a lot of men who are colorblind, but actually I haven't met a woman who's colorblind, and statistically it's only 1 in 200. And so if you notice a subway map, typically I'll say to my friend, oh, well, take the green line, or take the red line, or the orange line. I rarely will reference the number, but if someone's colorblind, it might be harder. So red and green are typically colors that people who are colorblind are sensitive to. Yellow and blue are not so much. And rare that you would see black and white color blindness, but this is sort of an image of what that might be like. So it depends. You don't want to rely on color only. For example, these buttons, stop and go here. You can read it. It's a little hard, but someone who's colorblind, that's what it'll look like. It'll just look like brown on brown. And then the text gets lost in the color. Contrast is a better way to make something more accessible, whether or not you want to add an image. And someone's not necessarily relying on the color of for the information. You know, I'm sure you're familiar that Facebook is blue. Do you know why? Because Mark Zuckerberg is actually colorblind. That's why Facebook is blue. I just read about that. I thought that was cool. In terms of tables, I'm not going to go very in depth in terms of the code, but here's a summary about it, because some tables are more simple, some are more complex. So here's a summary just so you have a heads up about this. In terms of captions, to explain what's in the table, TH must be there for the header, and scope should be included. And also CSS to have specific rules for the table. Tables should only be used for tabular data, like a spreadsheet or something that's in a matrix format. It shouldn't be used for layout. You should just use CSS for the layout. In the past, tables were used much more commonly, but now not so much. In terms of these tags for the head, the body, footer, and you can find more of these in Google or online other places. Forms. It's important to have labels for the input. So then it's also good if screen readers that rely on the keyboard. Most of us are relying on the keyboard as well. The label for might only be for these small radial buttons. If you use a label for, that means that you can also include the entire text. So if you click on the word, that also gives you the selection as well. It's great for keyboard users and people using screen readers. And if you use groups like radio buttons, checkbox, or setting up a field set, and legend, those are basic rules for tables. Now, talking about video and audio, and as a deaf person, this is something I've experienced a lot of frustration with. Most videos online are not captioned. Many video broadcasts are not accessible to deaf people. Some people think, well, YouTube has automatic captions, and I encourage people to use YouTube, not Vimeo. Vimeo does not support captions at all. YouTube has some captioning support. And I also recommend YouTube because it's very easy to use and it's an easy way to add captions, but do not rely on the auto captions because they're really hard to understand, and I'll show you in a moment. an example. It's important to have good quality captions and transcript, not just reliant on speech recognition. You could use that perhaps, but make sure that it's cleaned up, or perhaps hire someone who can then produce a good quality transcript beyond just what an automatic speech-to-text recognition can do. And also, if you use radio podcasts, you can have a good enough transcript for that, but make sure that you have the proper style. Identifying speakers, for example, make sure that punctuation is correct. And if there are any sound effects like laughter or playing music, that information is included as well, because a deaf person is not going to hear those audio cues. For videos, should have both captions and the transcript available. And the reasoning is because if someone is deaf and blind, they're not going to be able to follow the transcripts. The captions. They might be relying on a braille display that pops up for them to be able to read the transcript as a way to access the video. And transcript benefits not only deaf people and deaf-blind people, but perhaps it's an hour-long video. Somebody might be able to skim through the transcript a lot faster than watching the entire video. But it really, in general, is best to have the transcript and the captions. Sometimes you want to be able to watch and hear the video and then be able to read the captions, or watch the video, a deaf person watching the video, or just read the caption, the transcript. So also, it's important to have the audio and the video sync, and as to have the captions be synced as well. In terms of webinars, it's important to hire someone who's a professional transcriptionist, someone who's professionally trained for that, so that they have 98% accuracy with 220 words per minute. That's the required speed, and not everyone can do that. So if you want to have a video, pick a player that supports captions. And if you want a transcript that maybe it's too much for you to do yourself, this is a popular service, Casting Words, and you can use that for podcasts and also YouTube videos. If there's timestamp, you can also then upload it to YouTube, and they have a way that you can sync the captions with the video. I have more information on my own website. Usually I'll give a 1-hour presentation on this kind of information, so I only touching on points here. I want to show you why automatic captions are not reliable. There's no sound on purpose, just for you to watch it. So I've asked a person who could hear whether or not the captioning matched, and they said that it didn't. The speech recognition is just relying on a machine, so it's good that it does. It's hard to rely on the auto captions, and most people think, well, it's no big deal, we can just use that, but they really do need to be cleaned up by a person. So here's some general information. WebAIM is a great resource for making your websites accessible, and very clearly presented, the information there. If you'd like to have an evaluation, This is a very popular site, Wave, developed by the WebAIM team, and I do have that on my computer, and it's very helpful. It's not 100% reliable or accurate. Sometimes it might miss certain elements of the site. Firefox also has accessibility extensions, and the WAI has a lot of different tools here. Captioning, if you're more curious about that, I do have a website here with a lot of information, and my contact information is there as well. If anyone has any questions.
Are there any WordPress templates and or plugins that you recommend as being accessible, that stand out as being very accessible?
I'd have to Google it in terms of accessibility and WordPress.
So any that you use that you've come across that work really well, that you're comfortable with?
I just started using WordPress earlier this year, so I'm not as familiar. Yes?
What websites are potentially liable to being sued for being not sufficiently accessible, and under what theory?
There are so many. Well, 97% of websites are not accessible. For example, Netflix. The deaf community is actually suing in the process of a lawsuit right now with Netflix because they refuse to caption their streaming videos. Their DVDs have captions, but they don't have streaming captions. CNN is also involved in a lawsuit right now. They have captions on television, but they don't have captions on their web content. I know that blind people, they sued Target. There was the blind community involved in a lawsuit against the Target website. So there are some examples. And like I say, it's a better investment in your financial investment to make the websites accessible than be liable and possibly be spending money on a lawsuit later.
Are there any ways of tracking Google Analytics to see how many accessible people are coming to your site, so you can say to the client, you need to address this because you get a certain amount of traffic?
I don't think there's a way to track using Google Analytics. I think user testing is the only way to really track accessibility and these accessibility evaluation tools.
Aren't there separate browsers that can be used by accessibility?
What do you mean?
For the speech, it can read through. There are certain browsers that if you need it read to you, you can use that browser, but I'm not sure if it's capturable in analytics.
No, not that I'm aware. No. The same concept if you design a regular website. And your user experience is not just about people who are disabled, but you might try to have some user testing to see whether or not the website conforms to the expectations of a certain user group. So that's very similar to people who are disabled. The only way to really find out is to survey people with disabilities and get their feedback.
That's one of the questions I'm asking about developers asking the disabled community how to use certain things. I mean, I'm starting to lose my vision, and I found that it's very difficult to get somebody to say, well, it's very easy to do this because I see other technology being used sort of broadly. You made the inference about ramps and how everybody uses ramps, that it becomes part of the culture. it's not just about accessibility for those who need it, that it's really for everybody.
I'm sorry, was that a comment or a question?
Well,
Did you have a question?
The question is, how do you get people's minds wrapped around that you should be developing for everybody all the time? That to sort of step back and say, oh, I'm going to do this site for blind people, I'm going to do this site for deaf people. It's just that why should you include all of those accessibility tools as part of your regular development?
Well, because people aren't aware unless they have that explicitly explained to them. As a deaf person, I might say, well, I need captions, and I might be perceived as just being one deaf person asking for that. But people don't realize that captions benefit speakers of other languages. My parents have perfect hearing, but their first language is Russian, not English, and they watch television with the captions on because it helps them understand and learn English better. The disability market is huge, and so they shouldn't be overlooked. And also, people who are becoming older, you notice that baby boomers are now a very large segment of the population, and more of them are developing disabilities as they age. So, I mean, it's not easy. You know, you can overload people with statistics. People who care tend to really make the investment, and others don't, they won't. Do you want to do, you know, responsive type of reactive design, or people who want to base, you know, or develop based on user experience? So those are two different approaches that people can take.
Okay, no, I'm just sort of I guess this comment is that the very fact that you're here raises an issue that a lot of people in this room probably just never even thought about. I mean, that may be an assumption on my part, but I think that this is a way of raising the awareness for the rest of the community.
Yes, right. And for me, I'm a sighted person, but sometimes I need if I'm having a page that's slow to load, I still like to have a description of the image because I might shut off images and be able to just still want to be able to see what it is to make it load the page load faster. You know, it's just having something .jpg isn't necessarily going to be very helpful, but it helps the research. It helps the searchability as well if those tags are there and the descriptions are there. So even though I'm not blind, I benefit from accessibility for blind users. And also with captions, people think, well, they don't need that, and then later on when they use them, they'll realize how much they appreciate it and they wish they, you know, had used them earlier. I think there was someone in the back with a question.
Oh, I was just wanted to respond to something that the gentleman up there has said earlier. Why include it in everything that you do as kind of a default thing? Well, why do we include mobile versions and responsive versions of the sites by default? I think it should be treated the same way.
I'm not arguing with you.
I'm saying how it's more than one.
Oh, that's a good point, yeah.
Could you speak more about responsive design? You're mentioning that. Are you saying that responsive has a better capability for the disabilities?
Well, not exactly. It can overlap, but not exactly. Because if you use mobile phones, but if the code is not compatible for a mobile phone, I mean, I'm not sure how exactly people with limited vision even use the mobile phone. That's still new for me, but that's another example in terms of having the code be compatible for what shows up on a mobile phone. So I know how people with disabilities use an actual standard computer. I'm not as familiar with people with disabilities using mobile devices. Yes?
This is more in reference to what the man was saying about how do we make it more accessible, more of standard. I think we're in a good time right now with HTML5, CSS3, and all these new additions that are still in the works of, being the overall rule of land, compared to how HTML itself was very do it until it looks right kind of thing. So right now, if we do push forward in as many places as we can, I think it will eventually be something more.
Correct. But that isn't enough. We need to remember also about color. It's not just about coding, it's also about the design and the visual aspects of the website as well. That's a good point, thanks. Over there?
Yeah, are there tools, as a designer and front-end developer, I'm always using tools like something like browser stat to get into other devices because you can't possibly have all the devices. And this is just sort of something I hadn't even considered, that there's even more devices that we're designing for that we're not even looking at. So I'm just wondering if there are tools as developers that we can access to sort of get an experience of what the disabled person may be seeing.
Yes, you can download free tools. I think if you have a Mac has screen reader software already built in. I just found this out. And also, there's captioning support too, which I was really amazed at. And I'm curious as what the screen reader with captioning is going to look like. So Mac screen reader also has captions. It's telling me what it says. It's really cool. So if you have a Mac, you use the voiceover. That's the Mac feature. So you can, that's an option. I think in Windows, I'm not sure what it's called because I don't use Windows. There might be something that's parallel, that's the same thing for Windows.
Okay, can I just add to that? Because I do use Windows and I just want to follow up. Is that okay?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, well, on Windows there are a couple of speech-to-text software. One called Natural Reader that will read the text on the page, and it will also in the Pro version turn it into a WAV file so that you can automatically, it'll read through the copy you've written, turn it into a WAV file, and you can repost that right on the site, so you've automatically turned it into something for people who can't see but would like to hear what you've just written.
Thank you for saying so.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.